Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive.
Always.
Awesome. So today we're tackling something I know a lot of English learners struggle with. That feeling of getting stuck when you're trying to speak. Like your mind goes blank and the words just disappear.
It's the word.
Right. And we're pulling some super helpful tips from the English Dose podcast on how to keep those conversations flowing smoothly.
English Dose is great. I really like how they emphasize that fluency isn't about speaking perfectly.
Exactly. It's more about communicating your ideas clearly and effectively.
Yeah. Even if you stumble a little along the way.
And honestly, I think that's such an important point. I used to get so caught up in trying to find the absolute perfect word, the most impressive vocabulary, but that just made me more nervous and prone to freezing up.
It's so true. It happens to everyone. Even native English speakers make mistakes.
All the time.
Right. I mean, think about it. We all stumble over our words sometimes.
Oh, absolutely.
So English Dose really encourages listeners to kind of shift their mindset. Like, instead of striving for this impossible perfection, just aim for getting your message across clearly.
Yeah, I love that.
And that might mean using simpler words and phrases when you can't quite remember that more sophisticated term. You know what I mean?
Totally. Like,
Yeah.
if I can't remember the word exhausted, I can just say, I'm really tired.
Exactly.
It's all about getting that meaning across.
Yeah. And another thing English Dose talks about that I find really helpful is using fillers.
Fillers, you mean like, I always thought those were bad.
Yeah, I mean, some fillers can definitely be distracting if you overuse them,
Oh,
but when you use them strategically, they can actually be super helpful.
really?
They give you a little bit of thinking time without creating those awkward silences.
I see.
English Dose suggests using fillers like, well, let me think, or that's a good question, which buys you a few seconds to gather your thoughts.
So instead of just like sitting there in silence,
Yeah.
I could use a filler to keep the conversation going, to give myself time to think.
Right. It feels much more natural than just dead air.
It does, yeah.
So much smoother.
That's really helpful. And speaking of things that can help make conversations smoother, English Dose also suggests paraphrasing when you just totally blank on a word.
Oh, paraphrasing is such a good one.
But isn't that like mostly for essays and things like that?
Well, it can be helpful for writing, of course,
Yeah.
but it's actually a really valuable speaking technique as well.
Interesting.
It basically means that instead of getting flustered when you forget a specific word, you just describe the word using, simpler terms.
Okay.
So, for example, let's say you forget the word wallet. Instead of stopping the conversation, you could say something like, it's the small thing I carry my money and cards in.
Ah, okay. So instead of saying I left my the thing on the table, I could say I left the thing that holds my money on the table.
Exactly. It might sound a little funny, but it's way better than, just stopping the conversation completely.
Yeah.
And honestly, the more you practice paraphrasing, the less you'll find yourself having to rely on it. Because, like, English Dose really emphasizes that developing the ability to think directly in English is, like, the ultimate key to fluency.
Thinking English, that sounds a bit profound.
It might sound simple, but it can really be a game changer.
How so?
Well, when you're constantly translating back and forth in your head, it slows you down.
Right.
It makes it so much harder to speak spontaneously. But when you start to think in English, the words just flow much more easily and naturally.
So how do you actually do that? Train your brain to think in English.
Well, English Dose gives a few practical suggestions. One of them is to try to incorporate English into your daily life as much as possible.
Okay.
Like, describe your surroundings in English.
Okay.
Think about what you're doing during the day in English.
Mm.
Even just talk to yourself in English.
Talk to myself. People will think I'm crazy.
Huh. Yeah, maybe keep it down in public.
Good point.
But seriously, practicing speaking by yourself is one of the best ways to improve your fluency and build your confidence.
Yeah.
So, talk to yourself, record yourself speaking. You could even use some of the AI tools out there that are designed for conversation practice.
Cool.
The point is, the more you immerse yourself in the language, the easier it will become to think in English.
Awesome. So to kind of sum up what we've learned from English Dose today, it seems like the biggest takeaway is that fluency is all about communication, not perfection.
Definitely.
And there's some really simple strategies that we can all use to keep those conversations flowing. Like
Yeah.
we talked about using fillers, paraphrasing, and thinking in English.
Mm,
All super helpful tools.
absolutely. And the best part is that they get easier the more you use them. It's all about practice.
Practice and not being afraid to make a few mistakes along the way.
Exactly. It's all part of the learning process.
So tell me, what's one situation this week where you're going to try out some of these tips from English Dose?
That's a good question.